All right. Well, welcome to another episode of the Rest and Recovery Podcast. I have Dr. Jason Barker, naturopathic doctor, coach, and overall great guy, and found you via the social webs. I love that aspect of it, and a lot of the things you talk about really resonated with me, both from a naturopathic perspective, but also all the endurance stuff you do. So, Dr. Jason, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, look forward to the conversation. Like I said, a couple of things that drew me were some of the endurance sports videos I've seen with you, and some of the things you've done as an endurance athlete myself, or a wannabe. Can resonate with a number of the things that you talk to, and areas that I could use improvement on. But maybe before we kind of jump into that, maybe give a little more perspective on what your practice is and some of the things you focus on.
Yeah, sure. So as a naturopathic doctor, I have a clinic here. We're trained as general practitioners, so we kind of see whoever comes in the door. So like GI things and hormone imbalances and migraines and rashes and all those type of things. And then I also have my niche that I've kind of really gotten interested in. That's my passion. And that's working with active and athletic people, helping them maximize their health and performance. And I got into that just because I would have these really healthy, super fit athletic people coming in the clinic with, issues like fatigue or insomnia, or, they were tired during their workouts, and they'd gone to, their regular primary care doctor, and they'd run kind of a abbreviated set of labs, and they're all normal, of course. They say, well, I don't know what's wrong with you. Maybe quit running so much. And so that's like, as an athlete yourself, and somebody tells you to cut back, that's like,
yeah, that's like a hard no.
Yeah. It's like, do not talk to me that way. So I started working, getting into exploring how I can help these people perform better. And that's if their energy's low, or if their performance is flat, or anything like that, where people are healthy, which in the kind of the standard medical paradigm, health is the absence of disease, right? So if you don't have a disease, then you're healthy. And I would argue, and most of us athletic types would argue that no, that's not health. It's like, how well am I performing?
Right.
Yeah, you can go run a 10K today, no problem, right? But how do you feel? Are you recovering? Are your runs flat? So there's a lot. So that's kind of what I do. That's long-winded.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of nuance to that, like you were saying, like in to the point of, don't tell me to cut back on my running, but the fact that you have the unhealthy athlete, right? You have these people that look physically fit, the ideal, Pinterest perfect view of it. But yet they're still feeling underperformed. And so when do you know the difference between there's an underlying issue, or you're just tired because you've been doing these things as a byproduct?
Yeah, and it's not easy for starters to figure that out, because the kind of the ultimate diagnosis of that in athletes when they fall flat and they don't feel well and the wheels kind of come off is overtraining syndrome.
Right.
And so by definition, a syndrome is a collection of symptoms. It's not a disease. And syndromes are also tough to pin down, because they're also there isn't a one singular specific physiological thing that's broken in that.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times uncovering overtraining syndrome is also, we call it a diagnosis of exclusion. So you have to run through the whole list of, why do you feel the way you do, to kind of back that up, overtraining syndrome, if we're going to talk about that, is, the athletes are tired all the time. They're moody, they're irritable, their performance is just gone.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so you need to rule out a lot of stuff. Are they anemic? Are they hypothyroid? Do they have a mental emotional thing going on? Do they have anxiety? Are they clinically depressed? Energy intake imbalance. So there's a whole lot of testing that needs to happen. And once you kind of rule that stuff out, then you can kind of put the stamp on it. Like, yeah, you have overtraining syndrome. And even that I always feel like is pretty, it's almost kind of theoretical too, because again, there's not like a list of lab findings that where we can actually say, you know, you have overtraining syndrome. So there's always, you know, there's a lot of, like you said, there's a ton of nuance with that. And so, you know, very detailed interview process, very detailed lab testing. And that's when we can kind of say, okay, this is probably what's going on with you.
Yeah.
And here's how we're going to address things going forward.
So it's a bit of a lengthy process of elimination. And because I guess because you know, for you're seeing a person at a particular snapshot and you don't have like the like baseline, so to speak, to see if all that stress is producing this as a negative byproduct.
Right. And that's where the art of the, you know, art and science of medicine comes in, is looking at, you know, and you can listen to people's past performances and everybody can come in and say, I did this much power and this is my performance. And then you see what they're doing now. And, you know, oftentimes they'll come in with again, like I said, a standard set of labs, you know, like a CBC, which looks at your red blood cells and your white blood cells, and a chemistry, which looks at electrolytes and organ function. And, you know, if they're lucky, they'll have had their thyroid looked at or their eye. So, you know, I'm not dinging other professions or anything like that, but usually that lab testing is very scant. And so that's when I get excited. It's like, okay, well, there's all kinds of stuff we can look at and dig into to try and find what's going on with you.
Yeah.
And even having said that, a lot of times these labs come up very normal still. And so that's where we really, again, that art that I keep talking about comes into where it's like, well, these are your symptoms. This is what you've done. Here's kind of the evidence we have. And then we can work to put a plan together for these folks.
Yeah, I guess the art around that subjectivity of me, like if it's me, my numbers look good, but I still feel like crap. You have to account for that piece.
Yeah, because again, you're not treating lab values, right? So if you don't feel well and you tell me that and you say I can't sleep and my heart rate is elevated and your labs are normal, that doesn't mean that there's nothing not wrong with you, you know?
Right.
So that's where we have to get into that. And it's a lot of work too, because, you know, again, I think in our country, at least, people, you know, the majority, and I'm speaking in generalization, is people going to the doctor and they think like, oh, I have X problem and you have a pill, X pill for problem and I will feel better. And it's just, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah. It's a little more, as I'm learning myself, a little more, not all over the place, but it's not that simplistic or that quick of a fix. And I think definitely we've gotten used to the quick fix mentality that, you know, if things aren't done in 2 weeks, you're like, what the heck's wrong?
Yeah. And I think there's also we as a society have a lot of faith in medicine, that it's science and it's an exact science and this is how it works. And it's just, that isn't the truth. You know, where I always say to people, you know, we're living, breathing organisms.
Yeah.
You know, it's like an animal or a plant. And we have a lot of patterns that we go through and a lot of different rhythms and a lot of variety. And we've got a lot of stuff going on. So we are not little machines that are easily fixed, like your car engine. You know, that's broken, fix that, you're good to go. It's just that's how it works. So.
Well, and you know, I've used the term we're all walking chemistry sets, because as much as we may be even genetically aligned with our family, there's still so many nuances. And I've heard the example of identical twins, and there's still significant differences, or you see two different paths of physical, mental, and emotional results, and they're identical and they're in the same family, but yet different results.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's that same kind of term, biochemical individuality. Everybody's different, and you know, that diet may work great for you and that may make another person not perform well. So that's where you just have to really individualize this care. And it sounds well, it doesn't, that's what it is. That's how I train practice, is just really taking each person as an individual. And sure, we always have that cumulative knowledge of like, oh, I've seen this before, and
Yeah, correlations and such.
But yeah, but everybody's different in how they got there and how they wound up with
what is it what is it for you that that you do this as a career? Like, is it, do you like the problem solving, like the I don't want to say the fixing, but the helping and enabling people to reach their potential? Or
yeah, I love it. The big reward is, again, like when, you know, I've been to every doctor and they didn't do anything for me and they just prescribed me an antidepressant. That's where I get excited, is because it's like, well, yeah, we can really dig in and look. And so I really enjoy that process. You know, I love looking at the expanded lab testing that we do and kind of correlating that with what this person is telling me and coming up with a plan. And then obviously the most rewarding part is when they write back or come back and say, yeah, I feel amazing. Thank you. You helped me. And that's of course the reward, but then it always comes with, I can't help everybody also. And yeah. I've definitely not helped a lot of people despite my best intentions. So of course, you know, we all want to do well. We all want to help, and regardless of what our profession is, and that hurts, you know, when you can't get people better. But
sure. So, yeah. Well, we were talking offline about my own experiences with that, and yours as well, and that overtraining, under recovered. What are things that you maybe recommend either to your clients or even those listening, obviously we're talking kind of general, because like we just said, there's a lot of prescriptive elements to it, but some preventative measures to mitigate that kind of end result?
Yeah, you know, it's as far as like tracking physiological things, I'm a huge fan of still looking at resting heart rate in the morning. That's always been around for a number of years, you know, tracking your resting heart rate in the morning. If it's a beat or two or however many higher, that is a sign of that your body's under stress. And that's means that you don't go hard today. Maybe you gear it down a little bit and take it easy. And of course, you know, now we have this heart rate variability, which is, you know, right, similar, but a different way of tracking what's going on with our nervous system via the cardiovascular output or the heart rate. And so that's also, I think, a really worthy investment for people to get into and track their own heart rate variability, because it's a form of biofeedback. So yeah, looking at that and just being really self-aware, you know, am I not sleeping? Is my sleep crummy? You know, because that's an early sign of overtraining syndrome, the elevated resting heart rate is. And then mood changes too. So, and that's a little bit tougher because it's difficult for people to be objective about their moods, I think, most of the time. And then, you know, never fails, they say, well, ask my wife or ask my husband how my mood is.
Right. That's a can to open up.
Sorry, it really is. But so being self-aware, am I more irritable? Am I feeling more depressed? Am I feeling flat? So those are things that I like people to look at. And then the other big thing is, you know, when we talk about overtraining syndrome and burnout and fatigue, is how much stress do you have? Like you and I were talking about, you know, there's that one, we always kind of think like, oh, I'm training hard and I trained too hard and that's why the wheels fell off. And it's like, well, that's just one compartment of stress that you're dealing with, you know.
Right.
Do you have a family? Do you have little kids that need a lot of whatever help? Do you have an intense job? You know, and I tell people, like, stress is stress is stress. It doesn't matter if you're training for a marathon or if your job is stressful or your family life is stressful. It's all cumulative.
Yep.
So that's a big it's a big deal, and the world and society is becoming more and more aware, I feel like, of stress. At least for me in my world, people come in and, you know, I've got this job and I've got 3 little kids and I'm training for an Ironman. It's like, okay, well, whatever, you're stressed, you know, this is your problem. You're stressed.
Something's got to give here.
Yeah. It's it feels very commonsensical to me, but then I'll absolutely get people who I'll say, yeah, the stress is tearing your body apart. And they're like, what, really? Stress will make me have a physical problem? It's like, yeah, absolutely. You know, that it's very, very real. And my example of that is, you know, the mind body connection, people always kind of poo poo that, but it's like, well, if I sit here and show, you know, if it's lunchtime and I show you a picture of a delicious meal and you haven't had anything to eat, you're going to start salivating. You're going to start, you know, releasing digestive enzymes. Your body's going to be prepared to digest the meal. So that isn't magic. That's the mind body connection.
Right.
So same thing with stress. It's how that prehistoric part of our brain, how it perceives the world. And we're wired to determine if something is a threat or not, you know, because we're built to survive, right? So
Sure.
those stresses it's how we perceive them. That's what affects us.
And it's interesting because there's so many things that we just glaze over. And it's only for me the last couple of years or so that I've fully acknowledged that all these other things are contributing factors that you're talking to, even to the point of the technology we're using. And, you know, some things they're starting to talk about with the technology and the blue light and all this stuff. But you have to account for that. But too often it's like, oh, it's just food or it's just TV. And it's like, no, these things are actually impacting your body in a particular way.
Yeah, I just had this conversation with a friend yesterday as we were talking about, you know, our world, we were talking about schedules and how busy it is and how crazy, and we're all busy. We're all crazy busy, right? And I don't think we've advanced or evolved or whatever you want to call it to deal with this lifestyle we have right now. I mean, you think about a couple hundred years ago, your job was to like go and find a beast and kill it and find some food and eat it and sleep and not get eaten by a lion. And that was kind of what we did. And I'm not saying our ancestors had it easy, but they didn't have nearly the input that we've got going on in all the decision making we have to do. So it's a massive amount of stuff. And then again, you know, no wonder everybody's tired and burned out and depressed and anxious and can't sleep. So
yeah,
I mean, it's a great time to be alive, right? But it's a lot too.
Yeah. And I think that's the dichotomy, right? Of just accounting for that it does influence. It's not necessarily, hey, let's go back and live in the woods and die by a lion. But at the same time, you have to account that, you know, oversubscribing your calendar, which, as we talked offline, I'm excellent at. And some of it's just, again, a byproduct of life. So then you have to be discerning. I haven't, again, done that well, but discerning, like, you can have all these goals, but you don't necessarily have to do them in this quarter, right? Like I have a goal to do a Spartan, but it doesn't mean I need to do it in March if I've got like these other 6 things that are kind of leading up to it. So maybe I should push it out.
Yep. Yeah. It's just, you know, and we should know this as athletes too, is that pacing is the name of the game, right? But we don't always do it so well in our personal lives, but you know, it all adds up basically.
And it seems like we devalue the tempered pace. Even as an endurance athlete, as a runner, I still find myself struggling to stay at a particular heart rate level because my pride gets in the way.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I need to be at this. And it's like, but if you look at Maffetone and some other folks I follow, they're like 80% of your time should basically be a casual jog, maybe a little bit more than that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's I'm the same. We all are. We all have that. That's why we do this stuff, is because we have that competitive nature. So it's always a wrestling match is kind of how I describe it, between, you go out and you think like every run has to be on pace and has to be at this time. And sure, you follow your training plan as best you can, but there's, my daughters are competitive high school swimmers, and how's the meet? It's horrible. I draw, So we say you're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days. You're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. And it's just like part of ameliorating or whatever, mitigating that stress is knowing that you're not always going to bust it out every single workout.
So on the endurance front, so hydration is always a key aspect, and timing is everything. But I've seen in the news recently some cramping in specific a young Duke player. Yeah. And I personally hadn't had much of a cramping issue. Mm-hmm. I've always been pretty solid with that, but I hear a lot of people that get, the stomach cramps and whatnot. Maybe unpack that a little bit and explain what that young man's going through.
Yeah, so I think that, well, he's in the news, right? Because he's a star player at Duke, one of the best basketball programs in the country. And then he's been sidelined with a lot of cramps. And part of what I think got him into the news so much is that they did a sweat test on him, which is there's two kinds of sweat tests. They can analyze the ingredients of your sweat, and then they just weigh you before your competition and after and see how your weight changed. And apparently he lost 7 pounds during one game.
And is that a lot? I don't know context.
That's a lot. So, if you look it up, the average person loses 28 to 32 ounces of fluid in an hour of exercise. So 32 ounces of fluid weighs a pound, 2 pounds. But regardless, that's a very general statistic too, because we're not talking about intensity or the environment. Was it a 90-degree day or was it a cold winter? So, but anyway, generally a pound an hour of fluid loss is considered normal. And so, and I'm not a basketball player, so I don't know how long a basketball game is, but I guess in like 2 hours or so, something like that. But
I guess it just depends on breaks and such, but a little over an hour, probably hour and a half.
Okay, so he lost a phenomenal amount of fluid, and so that's unique right there. He's also got cramps, but backing it up, I would say, originally everybody pointed to dehydration as a cause of cramps, and it certainly is and can be. And then they said, well, it's electrolytes. Your electrolytes are imbalanced or you're deficient, and that's why you have cramps. And then as they've done more studies on people who are actually cramping, they're not dehydrated and their electrolytes are in balance. So you get into what else is going on. And again, we were talking about individuality. Your cramps may be because you didn't hydrate properly. Mine might be because my thyroid is imbalanced. So there's always, or maybe I'm on a certain type of medication that is making my body more apt to cramp. Or maybe I'm, I have some overuse going on because I train consistently. So what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of different reasons for cramps, and they're different in different people. But that player, sure, losing 7 pounds of fluid is pretty stark. And so I read that he got some IVs, off the court too, which is a great way to hyperhydrate yourself, because you like stomach and everything like that. But so he's unique, and they need to kind of dig into, obviously the guy is a excessive sweater is what I'd say. Some people don't or have a hard time generating sweat, and other people are very efficient at it. And obviously he's an efficient one. So interesting story with that guy.
Yeah. Obviously he's an anomaly, but there are some over sweaters. So you kind of mentioned thyroid, but is there a particular gland or organ that may be producing that, or is there generally an imbalance because of that, or that's just like, that's your baseline?
I think you can argue that there's not a specific organ function that would drive that. Maybe if somebody was hyperthyroid, where their thyroid is overactive, that's like being in your car and holding the accelerator down with the brake on. So in that instance, I could see somebody sweating, but I doubt that that Duke player has that going on. But to answer your question, no, it's just how somebody's wired, the degree at which they'll sweat.
Okay. So, all right, that's a really interesting case. So kind of related to that, something I know better than I should, which is the bonk, the infamous bonk. That usually happens more in endurance sports, but I guess it can happen in others that like basketball, where you're going hard for an extended period of time and you just kind of run out of fuel, whatever that is.
Yep.
Can you break down the bonk a little bit?
Sure. And my definition of bonk may be different than somebody else's, but to me, bonking is when, like you just said, you run out of fuel, so you run out of energy and you fall flat, you're just dead. And there's almost all of the time it's due to improper nutrition, not enough calories, maybe not the right kind of macronutrients. Some people are susceptible to hypoglycemia. So eating a carb-rich meal 45, 30 minutes before may actually lead somebody to having hypoglycemia once they start exercising. Because, right, you eat carbohydrates, you release insulin to absorb them into your cells. Some people have overzealous insulin systems or insulin sensitivity.
Yep.
And they're really efficient at pulling that sugar, which the carbohydrate becomes, pulling that sugar into the cells, and it dumps their blood sugar down. And then when you add exercise on top of that, right now your muscles are just sucking up that glucose or the sugar without the need for insulin. So you can really pull that stuff down. And that's kind of what a bonk is in my book. And to me, that's almost most of the time easily remedied by getting people's diets lined out a little bit better.
Okay.
And there's so much diet info out there, and most of it's good, and most of it's also all over the place. And again, it's different for you versus me. So that's my definition of a bonk. And then there's other times where people bonk or have a horrible race, and maybe it's because their gut locked up and they were nauseous or whatever, they were tired. So there's that kind of definition of a bonk as well.
Can it be underprepared as well?
As far as training goes,
yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I've done that a lot. So, I'm gonna go do this, and I didn't really run enough, and I fell apart. So yeah, absolutely. People sign up for stuff and they don't train adequately, and
yeah,
that's always a disaster waiting to happen.
Yep.
I'm laughing. That's the story of my life, actually.
Well, I'm glad I'm not alone, because I think I've done, out of like the 8 marathons I've done, 3 of them were bonks. One of them out of ignorance, super ignorance. It was the first one I did, and just undertrained and undernourished. And I hit 15 and I was like, this is going to be painful. But my worst one was my most recent. And I was overzealous, where I was really prepared for a half marathon. And then I did one. And then 6 weeks later, I'm like, I'm going to throw in a marathon, because I was feeling good about myself.
Yep.
And I hit mile 13. I'm like, I'm taking this sucker down. I'm going to Boston. Let's go. Within 4 miles, by the time I hit 17, it was like the other way around. I'm like, this is not going to end well. And my legs locked up. I walked like the last 7 miles, I think, with maybe slight jogs. Like, it was painful.
Yep. Similar story. I was doing a training run last summer and was busy at work, I thought, I'll go Saturday morning and run 20 miles, and didn't really pay attention to hydration, brought a water bottle, just stupid. On the way home, I'm like super nauseous, walking, like, why am I so sick? Well, geez, you're totally dehydrated. By the way, that's another good reason for a bonk too, is that it gets talked about a lot, but it's, and I think people gloss it over, but that hydration status is super important for you to be able to perform. So dehydration is a huge one with bonking. I think that's kind of part of why I feel like that's one of the most publicized public service announcements at races and marathons, and make sure you're hydrated. And of course, that's why all the sports drink people there and things like that. But yeah.
Is there like an equation when it comes to hydration, or some general rule of thumb to try and, because with water, you hear, what is it, your body weight cut in half in ounces in a day, and that's just like living, that's not active.
Right. Yeah. So you're referring to just everyday hydration status. Half your body weight in ounces is an ideal amount of fluid to drink. And then while you're out sweating and running, it's a little tougher to pin that down, because again, it kind of depends on the ambient temperature.
Right.
But and I'm not a good numbers guy, but it's like 15 or 20 ounces every 30 minutes or something like that. And that kind of jives well with what we said about people losing 28 to 32 ounces of sweat during an hour.
Okay.
So yeah, but continuous hydration during prolonged events is key. And I'd say a prolonged event is anything over, well, maybe a 10K, even on a hot summer day, I would want to drink during that.
Yeah.
And how fast you're going, and if you have time to take a drink and things like that. But
Okay.
Anything over an hour is where I'd say people need to start paying attention to hydrating and fueling.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know if that's a good answer, but
No. Yeah. I think so. So you're a naturopathic doctor. Kind of touched on a little bit of it, and we're talking about athletics. So pain management is, there injury and pain. There's two different things, but do you have certain protocols that you recommend, or again, this is not medical advice right now, but approaches to doing that?
Yeah, I guess I guess my answer would be is that everybody goes to an ibuprofen for pain management, for aches and pains.
Yeah.
And it's always tough to know what pain is like in somebody else's body. And if we're just talking about general aches and pains, things like that. Because me personally, every time I go for a run, and this is true my whole life, is like, oh, ouch, ouch, we all get accustomed to those normal aches and pains that work themselves out.
Right.
And then there's, the pain that you've got an injury. And then there's the pain of, that you overdid it. You ran 12 miles and you're sore. So that being said, is that I'm a huge advocate for not using ibuprofen and NSAIDs, which are the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs.
Right.
Just because, they do cause GI bleeding quite a bit of.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah. That's a very common side effect of that. It doesn't take a lot of it. Some people will never bleed from an NSAID, but a lot of people will bleed. And I'm not talking like pouring out buckets of blood, but there's that it wears the lining of your gut, and and that's a very capillary rich. There's a lot of blood flow in our gut, stomach, and small intestine. So, but anyway, those do have a well-known side effect of bleeding, and they also helps inhibit cartilage repair and regeneration. And so that's why I don't like chronic use of NSAIDs. Now, when I maybe have the start of a migraine, or I'm super sore and I've got to do something, I will take an ibuprofen, and that's when we call it vitamin I, by the way, when it's okay for me to take it. So that's a joke. But so what I'm trying to say is, like, every so often, if you've got a headache and you've got to go to work, you've got to think, yeah, sure, take an ibuprofen. I think that's okay. But and I'm kind of going on a tangent to your question here, but it's like people, you've been to the big box stores and they'll sell like a giant jug of 200 capsules of ibuprofen. And it's like, I wouldn't take that in 10 lifetimes. But so people have been told or sold that, like, oh, you have a little ache or pain, take an ibuprofen. And so I don't like that. So what do I use instead? So there's things like curcumin, which is an extract of the herb turmeric. So turmeric, is a spice that makes your curry dishes orange. So curcumin is an extract of that. And that's an excellent natural anti-inflammatory. And then I'm also a big fan of systemic enzymes. So stuff like, bromelain or papain, and there's a whole lot of these. Some are derived from plants, some are derived from a fungus, but enzymes are really good pain modulators because they help limit the production of those pro-inflammatory chemicals that we make as a side effect of using our bodies. And I tell people who are listening is that, we have these enzymes, and you'd want to take those on an empty stomach, because if you take enzymes with food, it's going to do a really good job at digesting your food. And that's a whole separate issue.
Another discussion.
But so I'll use those enzymes on an empty stomach after a long run or something like that. And I always use the term, it like kind of cleans up the mess of inflammation, which is shown in studies by how it mops up certain pro-inflammatory chemicals. So those are two things that I like to use for pain. CBD, which is an extract of hemp, has been wildly popular in the last few years.
Yeah.
And what I found personally is that, or not personally in clinic, is some people swear by it. It's like, wow, this is amazing at relieving pain and helping with my sleep. And then I get people who don't feel a thing from it. So again, it's all based on that biochemical individuality. So, but that can be a good one. I'm a big fan of using omega-3s. So those are essential fatty acids, most popularly extracted from fish. Omega-3s are very good at producing anti-inflammatory chemicals in our body. And just as an aside, it's always a battle between omega-3 fats and omega-6 fats. We need both of those for numerous physiological reasons in our body. The standard American diet is way rich in omega-6 and way low in omega-3.
Okay.
Omega-6 in general produce pro-inflammatory molecules. Omega-3 produce anti-inflammatory molecules. So you want to look at that. That's a blood test we can do, is look at your omega-3 to omega-6 balance. And that's one I run on all the athletes.
Okay. Because I think omega-6, isn't that in a lot of the oils used?
Yeah. And that's a great point, because you can go out and buy a bottle of fish oil, it says fish oil, and then you turn around and look at the label and it's got omega-3 and omega-6 in it. And I don't want anybody buying that unless you're like a vegan and because most of the omega-6s in general come from animal proteins. So
okay.
You get it in nuts and seeds and stuff like that too. But it's a rare case where I want somebody to supplement with an omega-6. So when you read the label, you need to be really careful that it just says omega-3, because you don't really want to supplement with omega-6. There's not a whole lot of good reasons to do that for most people. So
and a lot, it sounds like, and I've heard this in another conversation with a guest, was working with the body, not on the body. So you brought up inflammation, and I've seen that a lot, because there's autoimmune, which is high inflammation, but around athletics, it's a byproduct of the work, right? You get inflammation from tearing the muscle and all that kind of stuff. I keep hearing back and forth, is it a good idea to tamper that with all these different recovery modalities, right, that are out there, these recovery lounges and such, to facilitate faster recovery, to get there quicker, theoretically working with the body? What's your kind of take on some of that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And there's a ton of nuance with that. So what you're alluding to is that, when we go work and use our bodies, we are inflamed. And inflammation can mean anything from like chest congestion from running on a cold day, or if you sprained your ankle and it's red and sore, that's inflammation. So a rash is inflammation. So when we say inflammation, it means all kinds of stuff. But in the context of our discussion is that, we're inflamed because that's the immune system trying to repair the damage that was inflicted. So and there's always damage that's, anytime you use your body, there's always a little bit of damage. And the immune system does that, and it repairs it and builds you back a little bit stronger by that process. So and that's a big debate, is like, are we shutting off inflammation too much and thereby inhibiting our ability to adapt to that stressor? And I think that is a little bit of a reach, maybe, because, how do I put this? It's like the inflammation that occurs from the things we do to our bodies is so high usually, that I do think it is more limiting on our ability to recover than it does help a lot of times. And so I think it would be a unique case where somebody went to a recovery lounge and recovered so well that they didn't adapt, that they didn't get an adaptive response from that training session. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so.
I think it would be, I think it'd be rare that, like, oh geez, Scott, you're recovering so well that you're not getting anything out of your workouts, that you're not getting stronger and you're not getting faster because you're just doing such a good job with all your recovery and your body's amazing. I just don't see that. as a case. Now there's research that was out a few, I don't know, whatever, 8, 9, 10 years ago that was saying, you know, hey, don't take antioxidants because they limit that inflammatory response in some degrees. You need that oxidation, and oxidation is just another term for inflammation. So there were studies done, you know, on a micro level, like in a lab, that said, oh, you're inhibiting your inflammatory response, don't take so many antioxidants. And again, it's like, well, I don't know. I mean,
yeah,
none of us are getting out of here alive. Everything's inflammatory. Exercise is inflammatory. The food you eat is inflammatory. Your stress is inflammatory. Pollution's inflammatory. So I'll wrap it up by just saying, I don't think you're going to hurt yourself by over recovering.
Yeah. And
I gobble the stuff down. I do, just because, you know, I'm aging, and I mean, I feel great, but I also want to continue to feel great. So personally, I take advantage of every recovery thing I can do.
Yeah. I'm with you on that one too. I think we said earlier, it's kind of interesting time to be alive with a lot of different things coming up. But I guess every generation can say that in varying degrees. But yeah, it made me think, you know, because like we were saying, with muscle growth, you're breaking down the build up, and then it's like this layer, this, I want to say calcifying, but it's like you're creating this layer to create the growth. So if you're preemptively or doing it too fast, will you not get the growth out of it? Like you're almost doing the opposite effect with the good intentions.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting idea, but and I'm happy to be disproven with this too, but to me, I just don't see somebody doing such a great job of recovering that they're limiting their ability of their body to adapt to the training stress they just went under. Because yeah, like a good analogy is like somebody who lifts weights. You lift, and what you're doing is you're creating micro tears in that muscle. You're doing bicep curls, you're doing micro tears. You rest, your body heals those micro tears, and that muscle fiber is just a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger. And that's what we do. Is progressive overload is that concept where you rip it down, it gets rebuilt, rip it down, it gets rebuilt. But so yeah, I'm happy to be disproven on that, but it seems kind of like a reach to me.
Yeah, especially with some of the earlier conversations we've had with all the other stressors in life and inflammatory issues, that if our thesis of like we're now oversubscribed in previous generations of inflammation, then it would make even more sense to do all the things.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think do all the things, because we're all aging, you know, just sitting here. If you sat in your plastic bubble and meditated and had everything, you're still going to go gray. You're still going to get wrinkles. You're still going to age.
Yeah.
So, and maybe that's
you are. I'm not.
Yeah, I am. I need a plastic bubble. But, and that sounds kind of like fatalist, you know, and certainly people age more rapidly than others, but
right.
Like, and again, it's an individual thing, right? Because you see these hardcore athletes who've been ultra runners for 20 years and they look really young still. And then you'll see other people who don't. You know, we always say does not appear stated age. So that can either mean they're a lot older than they look, or they're a lot younger than they look. So
yeah. It's just, it's definitely an interesting aspect with so many different variables.
I mean, I'm only 28 and I've got all this gray hair.
You know? Well, that's the wisdom setting in. That just means you're very learned.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I keep saying. It's my wisdom showing up.
It is.
That's what that is.
Absolutely.
So in the realm of what you do when it comes to athletics and medicine, is there somebody that you look to right now as somebody you're learning from?
I'm not right now, to be honest. I usually have a good book.
Yeah.
And I don't have one right now, because I kind of read books in groups of different topics, and I'm not doing that right now. So I don't have a good answer for you.
Okay. Well, that's an answer. So that actually touches on, we're kind of creeping up on time. It does touch on some things that I like to close out on. So I think you answered my first one, which is what are you reading right now? So it sounds like everyone's uh, their test results is basically what you're reading.
Well, yeah, and I don't want to sound like a know-it-all either, but to be honest, I'll be very honest with you. I'm rereading the 4-Hour Work Week right now.
Okay.
So great book. Has nothing to do with fitness, but everything to do with the rest of your life.
It does. I mean, it does circle around it though, in the sense of balance and timing.
Yeah. You know, it's a good book though on the topic of recovery, and you mentioned those. What is it? The recovery clinics you go into. What's the name for those?
Recovery Lounge is what.
Yeah, the recovery lounges. So there's a book called Good to Go by Christy, and I'm going to mangle her last name, Oshwangden. I'm sorry, I apologize.
We'll look it up.
But it's called Good to Go.
Okay.
And she's a journalist, and she studied all these different recovery modalities, and she has some pretty interesting information in that book.
Cool.
And
I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah, check it out. And I'll also preface it like I don't buy everything she read or that she wrote, but it's also very interesting on that topic of like, you know, the cryotherapy and the recovery boots and things like that. So it's an interesting book, but if you're an athlete, you should check that one out for sure. It's good.
Yeah, I will definitely do that. All right. So what are you listening to right now, be it music or podcast?
Music or podcasts. You know who I'm listening to is Peter Attia. He's an MD.
Peter Attia?
Attia, yeah. And I knew I'd mangle his name too. He's got some good info. I like his stuff. I watch his, not all of his podcasts, but follow him on Instagram, and he's got a good blog and a newsletter too. So he's more into just general human performance. So he's got some interesting things too.
Yeah, I like him, and I've heard that a lot from guests. The other one that I've been on that's in the same category is Andrew Huberman.
Yeah, he's good too. Yeah, he's interesting as well.
Yeah, it helps me as someone who's not a scientist or medical professional by trade. He does a great job for me to really distill down complex things, help me understand them better. So
yeah, he's good as well.
What is your go-to rest and recovery method?
My go-to rest and recovery method is finish up with a workout, hydrate. I do consume calories, and I make sure that they are a balance of protein, fat, and carbohydrate also. And I still like to get it in right after. There's research that says that the anabolic window doesn't exist. It's more like an anabolic barn door. I read that someplace, I don't know where, but I still like to get the calories in. And then I will stretch pretty quickly right after. And then part of that is stretching again towards the end of the day type of thing. And I feel like that really, that makes a huge difference for me, is doing that kind of that double-ended stretch. Cause I'm just a tighter person in general. So that's what works for me. And then making sure I sleep. And then at night, I definitely take some things to lower my cortisol levels, because cortisol gets labeled as a stress hormone, and that spikes after hard effort. And personally, I know that disrupts my sleep. So I like to kind of shut that down. And that's an example too, where cortisol is, our body's natural anti-inflammatory. So why am I shutting it off when I can benefit from it? But too much messes with my sleep too. So I like to, so I ensure a good night's sleep, basically.
What, do you mind me asking your protocol for that?
Yeah, I like to use something called Cortisol Manager from Integrative Therapeutics. And then I also use something called phosphatidylserine, which is similar but different way of, I always put it as like short circuiting your cortisol production.
Okay. So,
the Cortisol Manager has some theanine, it has ashwagandha, it has sensoril, which is an extract of ashwagandha in it, and then that phosphatidylserine, and that works pretty well for me.
Great. Yeah, I
And
was curious personally, just because I've used some test strips, at home test strips, and my cortisol is usually through the roof.
oh,
So yeah, so I was just curious what you use.
what did you use? The test strip, like a saliva test? Was it
No,
saliva?
it's actually a UA. It's
Oh,
oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank on the name of the company. Um, Vessel Health.
vessel?
Vessel. Yep. And so it's a UA, at home UA. It's got some technology in it, and it can test a number of things. Cortisol happens to be one of them, and they're adding more and more capability to it. It's a pretty interesting tool for at least at home use, especially for some key things in vitamins and minerals.
Sure. Yeah, that's an important one to test your cortisol too, because like that, if somebody's popping up wide awake at 3 a.m., 4 a.m., the motor's running, that's almost always a cortisol bump in the
Okay.
morning. And it should be low. So if somebody's experiencing that, it's one thing to wake up and be groggy and go to the bathroom and fall back asleep, but like when you're up and you're on, that's almost always a cortisol spike. And that's why I push mine down after a workout, like I said, because I'll wake up like that.
Okay. Cool. Good to know. That's awesome. Well, Jason, yeah, I really appreciate your insights and what you're doing. And I really enjoy your videos, your YouTube channel too. It's been, I think, very informative and for me, either reminding or informing me of some new things that I need to consider as I try to manage my calendar a little better.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad you're enjoying that stuff. Glad it's helpful.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time and expertise.
You bet.
Thanks.